Hey everyone, today I'm going to bring you a budget Aura Stacker guide that's going to look at the earliest point at which you can get your Aura Stacker going in Tier 16 red maps with 300% Aura effect. The basis of this guide is going to be showing you exactly how to hit this Aura effect threshold as early as level 91, and with less than a 50 Exalt budget. Doing so will yield about 50% physical damage reduction, 90% Auras, 3 million Shaper DPS, and about 2.6 to 3k energy shield, depending on whether you add a Headhunter to the build or not. All the information is going to be provided as concisely as possible such that you won't have to do any guesswork or theory crafting of your own. Over the coming days and weeks, I'm planning to release additional videos covering higher levels of investment and eventually a forum guide to go with it. Now before we get started, I'm going to do the usual disclaimers so that you know exactly what you're getting yourself into. The version of Aura Stacker presented here is going to be fairly rough. You map with about 5.5k EHP, Chaos Damage utterly obliterates this build, and Cirrus 9 isn't exactly a walk in the park either. However, at this level of investment, you're going to at least be able to do most of the content in the game, and you'll certainly be able to use this character to farm additional currency to fund further upgrades. The first half of this video is going to show you precisely what is needed to construct this character, and in the second half we're going to go over our justifications for certain choices in our build, including why we picked a Spark Low-Life Ascendant, the unconventional inclusion of Herald of Ash, and also why we're using spell damage clusters instead of voices or cold damage. So to start with, I'm going to run you through the build as it is on this character, and all this is going to be provided in a POB in the description. That's going to be this exact setup pretty much. Now as you can see here, we have 2 passive points unallocated, but that's because my character is 93 at this point, and I want to show you a level 91 setup. So to start with, this is going to be basically the old budget Aura Stacker, pretty much. Not very much has changed in terms of the unique items we run, so we're going to have a Nebulous. Now you want to get to as close to 20% increased lightning damage and 20% increased cold damage as you can. 19, 20 is okay, but if you start running stuff like 17, 16, you're going to notice the missing damage. The implicits don't really matter so much, but it is optimal to try and get better implicits if you can, depending on your budget. Nebulous is very cheap, so getting decent implicits doesn't actually cost too much, but I've just taken a very cheap mana regen one here. Next up, we're going to use an Alpha's Hal Helm. Now, the enchant that you run in it doesn't really matter as long as it's an enchant for a 50% aura. There are other setups that use other enchants, but just for the sake of showing you how to set this up exactly, I don't want to show you 10 minutes more worth of content just because we used a different helm enchant. So, Malevolence, Haste, Wrath, Hatred, or Zealotry, they're all fine as helm enchants for Alpha's Hal, and it's not going to be too expensive either. That's all you want for your helm. Prism Guardian, you just want a very basic one, doesn't have to be corrupted or anything. Call of the Brotherhoods, it's very important that they have elemental damage catalysts. I believe that's turbulent catalysts applied to them to the tune of 20%. This is going to maximize the amount of lightning damage to cold conversion that we have to 48%, and having 2 of these will give you 96% of your lightning damage converted to cold, as you can see here. Next up, we're going to run a Simplex Redeemer Amulet. Now, the one I'm using is Awakened Slimed, and it has Clarity in it. You don't actually need to do this. All you need to have is a Redeemer Simplex Amulet, and you can do this by simply buying a Simplex Amulet with the item level that allows you to get 5% reduced reservation of skills, which is not going to be very expensive at all. You apply a Redeemer's Orb to it, and then you just scour Alkit until it has Clarity. Until it has Reservation. And I've left the gem socket here for Clarity, since you're not going to take Clarity. Doing an Awaken Slime for Clarity is going to make this more expensive, which is not the purpose of this video. You can also see we've anointed Champion of the Cause, and that is this node down here, just because it provides 4% reduced reservation of skills and 6% increased aura effect. So there's no other choice in terms of what you're going to be anointing. Next up, you want Doriani's Delusion Sorcerer Boots. You pick Sorcerer Boots because it provides a really nice amount of energy shield. The exact purity that you get doesn't matter. All your purities have to be at least level 21 anyway, and then the ones that you don't get in the boots end up going in your helm. So you can get ones with Purity of Fire or Purity of Ice, it doesn't matter. Lightning damage to spells and attacks, however, is ideal to get on it. And as you can see, it just provides us with a bit of movement speed other than that. But doing this saves us a gem slot, basically. And so that will, if you weren't to hypothetically run Doriani's, you'd have a lower ES amount on a build already starved for ES, and then you're going to have to do the Awaken a Slime Simplex Amulet. So it's just going to come out more expensive, and these boots are very cheap. In your glove slot, you're going to run Maligara's Virtuosity. Now, the way these gloves work is they cap your crit multi at 300%, but they also set it to 300%. That's going to save you a lot of money, because scaling crit multi in this build outside of these gloves will require you to start getting reduced mana reservation jewels that have ES and crit multi on them, or simply just double crit multi on them. And they range anywhere from 7 to 12x each, depending on which ones you get. Taking these gloves instead of an alternative set of gloves saves you potentially upwards of 50 exalts, right? So this is the absolute budget item, and there's no two ways about it. It gives us a nice amount of dexterity, which we really want. It also gives us 50% global crit chance, and we are starved for crit. Now, for your belt, I personally recommend using a headhunter if you have one, especially at the budget level. When you get to higher levels of investment, you don't really need the headhunter, but at the budget level, having a headhunter pretty much makes this build one of the best ultimatum killers without even having to invest very much money into it. Now, if you don't run a headhunter, you want to run a crystal belt that has very high ES rolls on it, defense catalyst, and then you want it to have a high amount of dexterity and strength so that you can level up all your dex and strength gems. Now, moving into the passive tree, we have a very standard setup here. So for ascendancies, we want to take the Necromancer and Guardian ascendancies, and then you want to take Path of the Templar, because even though in this version of the build we don't actually utilize that, in later versions there are opportunities to simply take this node here, and you then run pure talent with a 1% reduced reservation of skills corrupt on it, which is just putting 5% elemental penetration into the build very nicely. Now, outside of that, we're going to run Might of the Meek here. That's because it helps buff these, and it's basically a point-efficient way to obtain as much increased aura effect and reservation of skills as possible. If you were to not run Might of the Meek and then allocate this, you're losing basically 1 point per 1 point worth of mana reservation. I'm not going to get into that, but this is the most min-maxed way to run this build, and it also means that when you allocate these energy shield nodes later on as you gain levels before you switch to a different setup, you're getting 9% energy shield instead of 6. And as you can see here, it's also giving us a nice amount of dexterity so we can level up our other gems. We run Intuitive Leap here, so that we can allocate these two without having to pay to it. That's going to save us 1 point. We run Hazardous Research here, and we're going to run that with a 1% reduced reservation of skills corrupt on it. It's going to make it cost 1x, but it's very much worth it, because getting a 1% reduced reservation of skills jewel with energy shield on it elsewhere is going to cost you 1 additional level and 1.3 to 1.5x anyway. For a similar reason, Conqueror's Efficiency with 1% reduced reservation of skills costs you about 1x, but again, it's just going to save you a level, and it's going to save you money getting it elsewhere. Now, other than that, the tree is pretty much the standard Aura Stacker tree. Nothing special has been taken. We're taking, the reduced reservation and aura effect nodes here and there. Now, as for our cluster jewels, we don't run the Triple Voices setup anymore. Well, you can run the Triple Voices setup, but doing the Triple Voices setup comes out to very slightly more money and very slightly less DPS than what I've presented here. What I've presented here is actually the most budget version of the build, whilst also having slightly better DPS than the Voices setup. And the Voices setup also requires you to then run a 9th aura effect medium cluster setup, and that then adds a bit of money on as well. So for our largest, we want Practice Caster with Essence Rush and then Burden Projection. This allows us to spend 5 points. We get a bit of cast speed and spell damage, spell leech, and then we get access to our mediums. And as you can see, we've just taken 4 of them at these spots on the trees. Then for the mediums, you're going to take First Among Equals and Replenishing Presence on 4 to 5 passive aura effect jewels. This is pretty much the standard Aura Stacker jewel nowadays. You get 6% here, you get 6% here, you get 3% here, and that means you're getting 15% per jewel, with the option to then allocate an extra minor notable, which we're going to talk about very soon. But basically, you want, at minimum, 5 of these jewels. 5 with Replenishing Presence and First Among Equals. Now, for the remaining 3 jewels, here we go. We want First Among Equals and Self-Control, or Replenishing Presence and Self-Control. Self-Control gives reduced reservation to Discipline, and it just allows us to slot Discipline into our build without having to get extra mana reservation, so this node here saves us levels. And then down here, we want 2 Purposeful Harbinger nodes. Now, a lot of the Aura Stackers on PoE Ninja currently run 3 Purposeful Harbinger nodes. And they do that with 2 Heralds. This build sacrifices Grace, and instead puts in Herald of Ash into the build, and it does that so you basically get to save money and levels with your Purposeful Harbinger. So you don't have to get Purposeful Harbinger jewels that also have First Among Equals. Doing so is going to cost you about 4x per jewel, or even more in some cases. Simply running a Purposeful Harbinger jewel on its own is going to cost you, I think, 80C. It costs about 80C to roll on its own, and you simply have to allocate the minor notable and then the Purposeful Harbinger node, and then you have access to the jewel slots as well. So we're just going to do that, and as you can see here, we're not taking the other notable in this setup because you don't need it. As for the other jewels that we run, I'm going to run a Watcher's Eye with 1.8% crit strike chance while affected by hatred. This is the best single mod to get on a Watcher's Eye for our build and for our setup. And basically the reason is we are very starved on crit scaling, and having additional base crit from this and the Bottled Faith helps us then scale our crit chance of Precision, Zealotry, and some other sources. And we end up at about 75% crit chance with 300% crit multi, and we do that without having to invest very hard into crit, but it's a very good way to scale the crit damage multiplier. Next up, we're going to have a Cinder Swallow jewel. You just want 1% reduced reservation of skills on this with fire damage to spells. All the other stats on this jewel are completely irrelevant. You can pick it up with Energy Shield if it's available, but usually they're expensive, and when I looked, there wasn't even one available. Now, as you can see here, we're just skipping the jewel nodes on these jewels here, as we do not need them, and then we're taking 2 Energy Shield and Reduced Reservation of Skills jewels here. So you only need 2 of those for the build, if you have done the Hazardous Research and Conqueror's Efficiency with Reduced Reservation of Skills as well. Alright, now, I'm going to bring up a... Flasks real quick. So for Flask, we want to run Quicksilver, obviously because Quicksilver helps us move fast, and that's pretty important. Basalt Flask of Warding. We run Basalt Flask because with this build we get 36% physical damage reduction baseline from our Guardian Ascendancy node. So the way this works is the Guardian Ascendancy, as you can read from the second line on the tree, it says auras from your skills grant 1% physical damage reduction to you and your allies. We run 12 auras, so that's 12% physical damage reduction, and then with 300% aura effect, that's buffing it up to 36%. Now, combined with Basalt Flask, that's 51%, and then if our Headhunter provides us with endurance charges, we then get that to 63%, so almost 2/3 physical damage reduction in that case, or otherwise half. The Necromancer also offers a similar bonus for those who are wondering, where we get 2% attack and cast speed per aura. That gets put to 24%, and then multiplied by 3 gives us 72% cast speed from that. The rest of our flasks are going to be a Cinder Swallow Urn. We simply do this because it provides much better recovery, especially in ultimatums. It's very powerful. It also gives us the extra damage multiplier, which is really useful. I've chosen to go for like the budget Cinder Swallow here, but it's probably advisable to get the crit chance one if you can afford to. And we also then get Onslaught, which is very useful. Bottled Faith. This is the most expensive part of the build, pretty much, but it's absolutely mandatory. There's no two ways about it. It just gives us far too much crit and damage for us to pass this up, and then we use a Diamond Flask to scale an extra 25% crit. So with a Diamond Flask, 1 out of 4 of your sparks are going to crit that otherwise wouldn't have. That is very important. Now, I'm going to bring up a Excel document that provides a complete list of all the things you want to do to get your setup. So we'll go through it one by one. Now, the aura effect explanation is here. So the passive tree aura effect, including your anointment, provides you with 57% aura effect, and we're trying to hit 200 here. 2 purposeful harbinger jewels, in addition to the minor passes that you have to allocate while paving to purposeful harbinger, provide us with 46. 5 first among equals and replenishing presence jewels with the minor notable provides us with a total of 75. And then the final jewel, which is first among equals or replenishing presence plus self-control, provides us with 9. This means that we only require 13 additional increased aura effect from other sources in order to hit our breakpoint of 200% increased aura effect or 300% total aura effect. And that means that we need to allocate 5 minor nodes on the rest of our tree. And as you can see here, we have picked that up here, 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 and here. And that's just the easiest way to do that. Okay, reduce reservation. So we get 8% from Alpha's Hal, we get 6% from a Simplex Amulet, 1% from Conqueror's Efficiency, 1% from Hazardous Research. We get 2 Energy Shield Cobalt Jewels that provide it for a total of 2%. Our Abyssal Cinder Swallow Jewel provides us with 1%, and then the Self-Control Notable provides us with 30% for Discipline. And this is actually all you need on the build for this particular setup. Now, for large clusters, as explained, you want Essence Rush, Practice Caster, and Burden Projection times 4. Now, for those who are wondering, there is an easy way to craft this, and that is simply using item level 50 to item level 67 spell damage clusters, and then Alk and Scouring them. I believe you can usually hit it within, I think it's 80 off the top of my head, or 100 Chaos Orbs worth of Alks and Scours, which is fairly cheap for a triple notable jewel. Now, our medium clusters, it's just listed here, which is what we've already discussed, which is that we want 5 First Among Equals and Replenishing Presence medium clusters. Now, these can also be produced fairly cheaply just by buying them in that 50 to 67 item level bracket range and then Alk and Scouring them yourself. We want a First Among Equals or Replenishing Presence plus Self-Control, which you can make using the same method, and we only want 1 of those. And then we want 2 Purposeful Harbinger jewels that have 4 to 6 passives, and we only want Purposeful Harbinger as the only notable on it, right? In higher investment versions of this build, that's not going to be the case, but this is the budget Aura Stacker. I'm trying to save as much money as possible with a setup that can still do the content. Now, for jewel sockets on clusters, you want to allocate 1 jewel socket for your Watcher's Eye, 1 for your Cinder Swallow jewel, and then 2 for the Energy Shield and Reduce Reservation jewels for a total of 4 jewel sockets that you need. Now, as for our critical strike scaling, I've just provided this so people understand how we're scaling our damage. And that is with a 1.8% base crit chance while affected by Hatred Watcher's Eye, 2% base from Bottled Faith. We get 40% increased from Inspiration Support, 50% increase from Maligara's Gloves, 100% increased from enemies being on consecrated ground, and this is a consequence of both Bottled Faith and Zealotry. Then we're in this version of the build, we're running level 10 precision. You can probably get it a little higher, but it sort of depends what you're comfortable with, and I'll leave that to you guys to sort of figure out for yourself. But we're gonna get 114% from the level 10 precision that I've put this together with, and then on top of that, we're getting 120% increased from our, I believe, level 20 or 21 Zealotry. I can't remember which one I went with. And then a Diamond Flasks adds an additional 25% total crit. So with all this stuff, we get to about 50% crit chance, and then the Diamond Flask brings us up to about 75%. Now, here I've listed our auras and our heralds and what the reservations are for each. So our 50% reservations are Wrath, Zealotry, Hatred, Haste, and Malevolence. And remember, you need 1 of these enchanted on your helm for 15% reduced reservation. We're going to run all 3 purities. 1 of these purities is going to come from Midoriani's Delusion boots, and the other 2 aren't. You want them all to be level 21 at the very least in order to hit 90% all res. Or 90% max res, I should say. We're going to run triple heralds here. Now, Herald of Thunder and Herald of Ice are taken for the actual damage components of them, and also because they scale Purposeful Harbinger. The final herald we have a choice between Herald of Purity, Herald of Ash, and Herald of Agony. None of them really do very much for us, but the Herald of Ash provides us with burning damage, burning overkill damage explosions. I'm not sure this actually even helps that much, but it's certainly doing something compared to Herald of Agony and Herald of Purity, which do absolutely nothing for us. But to be perfectly honest, you could probably run any of the other heralds there, and it's realistically not going to very much matter. It's just as long as you run a 3rd herald of any type. I do believe running this Herald of Ash slightly buffs the fire damage off your Cinder Swallow jewel, so that's like a really min-maxy thing if that's something you care about, but it won't practically matter. As for our other auras, we get a level 21 clarity, in my case because of the Simplex Amulet, level 22, but you're going to not do that. You're going to just run a level 21 clarity in your Nebulous. You're going to run level 21 vitality, you're going to run level 10 precision, and then these are the flat amounts of mana you have to reserve. Discipline, you have to spend 30%, and then Smite, which we include. Now, Smite is an attack, and some of you probably aren't aware of this, but when you attack with Smite, you get an aura that provides you with lightning damage. This gets scaled up with all our aura effect stuff and provides us with a very significant amount of increased lightning damage. And thanks to, I believe it's the replenishing presence. No, First Among Equals. So as you can see here, First Among Equals says non-curse aura skills have 20% increased duration. This causes the smite buff, because you stack so many of these, it causes the smite buff to end up lasting about 12 seconds at a time, which means you only have to do it here and there, and then you're also getting a lot of increased attack speed from other sources, such as the Necromancer Ascendancy, which means you can attack with smite very fast. It's not going to feel like some slow attack that's going to get you killed or anything. And now here we just have the exact layout of how you're going to fit your jewels into your slots. So in Alpha's Hal, you want your remaining 2 purities of any type, and you want them level 21. You then also want to put Discipline and Precision. Now, part of the reason for this exact setup is because I'm keeping in mind the color sockets that are likely to roll on each of these items. Alpha's Hal, for example, is an evasion base. Nebulous is a strength int base, to my knowledge. Doriani's Delusion is an int base. So as you can see, we're only going 2 red here. Whereas, you could fit 3 red, but I don't want to do that because then it's going to cost you a lot of chromes, and we're trying to, play around budget. Some of these are interchangeable, but some of them aren't. And I guess we'll talk about that as we come across it. So Prism Guardian, you want to have 3 50% auras in here. They're going to be affected by blood magic without the huge mana multiplier. And then you can reserve additional auras with your life down in your Maligara's Virtuosity, where you're going to run your last 50% aura in addition to your 2 Heralds and Arrogance support. You want Arrogance support to be at least, I believe, level 19. Now, in your Nebulous, you're going to run Smite or Leap Slam. You're going to run Vitality. You're going to run Clarity. Doriani's Delusion comes with the inherent purity of X at level 25. You're going to run Val, Righteous Fire, Smite or Leap Slam, depending on which one didn't go in your Nebulous, your last Herald, and then Doriani's Delusion is where you're going to put the 50% aura, which matches your Helm enchant. And so this setup, as I've just explained, allows you to reserve pretty much exactly almost all your life. You have 3 life left over, and then the remaining mana here comes down to the fact that on the character I'm currently playing with, I'm using a level 3 precision, but obviously as you level that up, that would cut into the remaining bit of mana that we have. Now you want to have enough mana to cast your Spark, but you get tons of mana regen from Clarity and from other sources, so you don't need to actually have that much excess mana. Just as I believe you just need to have enough to cast Spark once, and then you regen enough that you never really are unable to recast Spark. Okay, and now we're going to get into the justifications of why we've picked certain things. So to begin with, we've gone with the Ascendant because the Guardian is a defensive ascendancy primarily. It absolutely sucks at scaling damage up, and it means that as a result, in order to play a budget aura stacker to the point where it can do tier 16 maps, you'd have to invest a lot more money into a Guardian to make it work. So Ascendant is kind of the no-brainer, and Ascendant having extra points to allocate just means that it can come online a lot quicker, and you can pull it off a lot cheaper at pretty much every level. I probably wouldn't recommend ever going with a Guardian at all, even if you had a lot of money to spend. I think Ascendant is just by far the superior aura stacker, and I've spoken to a lot of the top aura stackers on PoE Ninja, and they all agree that Ascendant is just the way to go. Guardian, the only times they ever played Guardian, they felt like it was a mistake and they regretted their choice. The reason we play Low Life compared to the Sucker Walls and then the Shield that is influenced and Awakener Slammed is because going the Sucker Walls route with Chaos Inoculation provides you with less damage as you lose Pain Attunement, and it requires a far larger investment. Since you won't have any life to reserve your auras, instead of doing 6 auras reserved with life and then 6 reserved with mana, you have to reserve all 12 or all 13 or 14 with mana. That requires a lot more reduced reservation, so that means you have to start getting Intuitive Leap and Might of the Meek with 1% reduced reservation on it. They cost, I think, 10x each. Then you also have to run far more jewels with it, which means you have to also be at a much higher level. And if you're going for the crit multi setup, then you're looking at something like 8, I think it's like 6 to 8 jewels that are going to cost in the realm of 12 Exalts each, which is just completely out of the question for a budget or a stack up. Shads and Prism Guardian is just by far the best choice. Of course, it makes you very susceptible to chaos damage, but it's either that or you can pay like an extra 100x to not run it. So that's why we do that. Now the reason we run Spark instead of Arc and Ethereal Knives is Spark is just better than Arc, especially once you have the juice for it. Arc tends to be better on an even lower budget, so if you're leveling up the character and you just want to use the sort of low life aura effect build while you're leveling through early maps, but without the 300% aura effect where it's kind of a lot squishier and a lot more susceptible to dying. There are some aura stackers who leak start aura stacker, and this is how they do it. They do it with Arc, since they just don't have any ways of making Spark feel good. But once you have this level of investment recommended in the video, you want to go with Spark. And then as for Ethereal Knives, you have to give up 1 gem in your setup for Fizz to Lightning support, and then you need to give up a Watcher's Eye mod for Fizz to Lightning conversion. That's the only way to then get the conversion going in the build. And that lowers its damage by quite a lot. Now, this wasn't a problem on the old budget Aura Stacker, and the reason for that was that we hit 400% Aura effect on the old budget Aura Stacker, so sacrificing those mods wasn't really felt. We still had enough damage once the build came together to sort of blast. But now, because we're in this heavily nerfed state, we can't really afford to just start off with Ethereal Knives. Ethereal Knives might be something worth exploring at higher levels of investment, but I believe Spark is just sort of the overall better way to go. And I think Spark is also a lot better for ultimatums in my experience, though limited. And it has some other perks, such as being better for boss killing. A lot of people that I've spoken to on the PoE Ninja ladder have basically said that Ethereal Knives just feels like it doesn't have the damage to kill bosses until you are investing upwards of a mirror into the character. So that's why we're doing this particular setup. Now, I'll go through each item in our build one at a time. So Nebulous is something that you're never going to be able to replace. It's the core of the build. You're getting increased cold damage and increased lightning damage when you go above 75% cold and lightning resistance. Now we run 90% of each resistance, so that is 20 times 15 plus 20 times 15. Off the top of my head, that's 600% increased damage. That's just, it's too powerful for a weapon. And there kind of aren't really any alternatives that we have available to us. And especially in this build, we don't have too many sources of increased damage, so this is just like multiplying your damage by 7 for the most part. The Alpha's Hal, the alternatives to this are running elevated reduced reservation of skills off a rare helm, and then you have to also get +2 socketed AoE gems via an Ashling Unveil. This is very expensive, so just getting the reservation onto the helm, using the 2 Maven Orbs on average is going to cost you about 700 C, and then the Ashling Unveils, they're not guaranteed, so you're probably going to have to do multiple attempts and then scour prefixes each time, and that's 2x per attempt of that, plus the Ashling Unveil, which I believe sells for 1x on TFT, so 3x per attempt at getting that. Oh, and then, now the thing is, that's very expensive just on a Hubris circlet, but then putting it onto an Archdemon Crown, as a lot of people are doing, the Archdemon Crown is one of the rarest bases in the game. It's going to be very difficult to get it with an enchant on it. You may have to run Gift of the Goddess Uberlab yourself multiple times. This may take you like a day or two to farm out one of the 5 enchants that can go on it. And that's even if you're buying the base, which last I checked was somewhere in the realm of 70 to 100 Exalts. So it's just very expensive to go with any other option than Alpha's Hal, which is kind of unfortunate since Alpha's Hal doesn't give us any energy shield, but it is what it is. Now, the Simplex Amulet, the alternative to running the Simplex Amulet is simply just running a non-Simplex Amulet. You're going to get 5% reduced reservation of skills doing this. For the higher levels of investment, it's probably worthwhile doing this. Now, the Simplex Amulet does allow you to save a bit of money on a jewel, and it also saves you 1 level, which makes it ideal for the budget version of the build. But for higher levels of investment, you're going to want to spam the Crit Multi Essence, I believe it's Essence of Scorn, until you get reservation on it, and then craft on Energy Shield. And that's just adding a lot of expenses to the build, and then the further levels to that are running Clarity and Reservation, and then constantly scour wiping your prefixes until you get energy shield onto it, and this is also after you've done multiple attempts to get a free suffix space so that you can hopefully get crit multi. Basically, upgrading from this amulet tends to be very, very expensive. Now, I've explained the shabs and the Prism Guardian. I think I also explained the gloves earlier on, but just to go through that, basically, not running the gloves means we have to get crit multi-jewels, and that adds an insane amount of expenses to the builds. So there's kind of no alternative here when you're doing a budget or a stacker. For your belt, Headhunter, the build isn't at the point where it can just meme on the rest of the game, right? If you stand still in an ultimatum and just spam your skills, you may die. So running a Headhunter allows you to still steal buffs when you're dealing with dangerous league mechanics like Legion, Metamorph, Abyss even, and especially Ultimatum. And this is going to allow you to scale up and be a lot stronger in that dangerous content. I would highly recommend playing it with a Headhunter, but I have tried it with a Crystal Belt. With the Crystal Belt, it's nicer because you get closer to 3k ES right off the bat, but it does mean ultimatums can get a little sketchy. You have to pay a lot more attention with what you're doing. As for boots, a lot of people like to run Voidwalker because of the budget factor, but doing this basically allows you to save on a gem slot since you get the free purity. But the other reason I like doing Dorianis is because we're already very starved on Energy Shield in the budget version of the build, and this is one of the best Energy Shield rolls for any boots out there. Now, the Voidwalker boots don't even have Energy Shield, they're an evasion base. So, as you can see, we dropped down to 2.2 or 2.3 KES without them. It's very, very hard to justify not running them with the budget setup. I've already explained for the crit reasons why we have to run Bottled Faith. There is a world in which you can replace Cinder Swallow Urn with Atzeres. I believe Atzeres comes out as slightly more damage and gives you Chaos Resistance, which is very good for the build. I personally just prefer Cinder Swallow because we're getting the Energy Shield recovery on kill, which is very, very useful in ultimatums. Right? It's the reason I've been kept alive a lot of the time. Basalt Flask. This can kind of be removed when you get to higher levels of investment, and potentially if you were able to fit Enduring Composure into the build, which is going to cost you 2 points, as you'll get 12% additional Fizz reduction from having consistent endurance charges. The problem is that at this level of the build, we're just far too squishy to go without a Basalt Flask, and I also feel that this build is a lot slower, even though we run Haste and buff it up. This build is just a lot slower than the old Aura Stacker, so we kind of have to run Quicksilver. I think that pretty much covers everything. Yeah, so now, just in case we need to go over it again, because I don't know that I covered it completely. The deal with Purposeful Harbinger is that you get 8% increased aura effect per herald affecting you. The standard way to set up an aura stacker is running 3 of these nodes, and then running 2 heralds. This build gives up running Grace. Grace is about 30% evasion, which is kind of unfortunate to drop, but it feels like the only aura we can afford to drop, since everything else is very crucial to us. And doing that allows us to only run 2 Purposeful Harbingers, and we also don't have to run Purposeful Harbingers with First Among Equals. Doing this starts to become very expensive, and, again, this is the budget version of the build. So we're going to run 3 Heralds, and then only 2 of these Purposeful Harbinger nodes. One is going to provide us with 24% increased aura effect, the other is going to provide us with 16. But even the one that provides us with 16 is still worth more than the entire amount that we're getting from, say, one of these First Among Equals and Replenishing Presence jewels, right? We're getting 16 from that reduced one, whereas we're getting 15 from this whole jewel. So, kind of a no-brainer there. Now, I'm going to provide this POB in the description so that you can go through it for yourself. I've done a bit of playtesting, and it feels fine to play with. Once you adjust to the playstyle, there is a bit of an, adjusting to playing Spark like this. You'll be able to see I don't think I covered it earlier, but basically running Divergent Inspiration, Awaken Cold Pen, Pierce, Spark, Pinpoint, and Spell Echo in the build, which I think is a pretty standard setup. There are some other options you can go with, but you can sort of figure that out for yourself if you want. These are just the best ones. These are the ones I would recommend out of what we have. Now, finally, I'm just going to cover the price of the build. I'm also going to provide this document in the description as well. So this is the breakdown of the price. We spent 40C on an Alpha's Howl that was enchanted with Malevolence. We spent 100C on Call of the Brotherhoods, 10C on Maligara's, 15C on Nebulous, 300C on the Redeemer Simplex Amulet. This isn't the one I was running. This is what it would cost to make the Redeemer Simplex Amulet that is not Awakener Slammed. Now, I bought 6 of these low eye-level Aura Cluster bases for 270C, and then spent 360C rolling them. Same thing with rolling Purposeful Harbinger. I spent 50 on the bases and 166C rolling them. Doriani's Delusion I saw as self-found, but I'm just putting it at 30C, since obviously you're going to have to buy it. Spell damage cluster bases, I managed to buy 4 for 5C all up, which is really cheap. I'm not sure if this is going to remain this way, if more people catch on to it, but who knows. They did cost me 440C to roll all up. And sorry, these don't cost exactly that amount. That's not what I spent. This is what it will cost on average, but what I spent rolling them ended up being very close to the average as well. So I've just included the average price, what you can expect. Now, I got a 1% cold penetration Might of the Meek for 10C, which I think is pretty standard. I spent 22C on Divine Orbs for my Watcher's Eye, re-rolling it to a higher crit roll. My level 21 Discipline cost 45C, level 21 Vitality 60C, so on and so forth. Now, I didn't go and buy level 21 gems for everything in the build. I leveled a lot of them up because I did Shaylord Breachstones in the end to level up. Hollow Palm leveling is also another viable way to get your Aura stuck at a level 91. Just, you can look up an Ice Crash Hollow Palm character on PoE Ninja and just copy the exact setup and then do a full respec once you're level 91. But either way works, and since I was doing Breachstones, I just leveled up all the rest of my gems for free, and a lot of them are sitting at level 19 or level 20, which I think you'll catch when I do the PoB upload, since the PoB upload is pretty much just my character. And then I spent 25C on the Abyssal Jewel for my Cinder Swallow. And then this side is just the Exalt prices for items that I bought with Exalts. Shav's Wrapping 6-link cost me 6.2, Prism Guardian 1.6. Then these jewels all cost 1.3 for the Conqueror's Efficiency, 1 Exalt for Hazardous Research, 3 Exalts for 2 of my 1% and 6% ES jewels, 7.8x on the Watcher's Eye, 10.4x on the Bottled Faith. So these 2 items plus the Shavs are pretty much like half of the cost of the build on their own. Everything else is actually fairly cheap. Awakened Cold Penetration at level 5 cost 1.7x. You don't have to buy it at level 5. I did, but I think it's cheap enough at level 5 to warrant just paying 1.7x for. Then 1x on a Cinder Swallow. I already had the Cinder Swallow, but I'm including its price. And so you get 48.5 Exalted Orbs total here. Even if prices go up a little, you're still looking at about 50 Exalts to put together this character, which I think is very good considering there are a lot of estimates that were being thrown around, closer to 100 Exalts post-nerf. This character plays decently for 50 Exalts. Obviously, on a lot of other builds for 50 Exalts, you're probably going to get better performance, but the thing is, you can now scale this build up from here, whereas a lot of other builds, they're going to start to plateau with their scaling at around 50 Exalts, and you can take this build a lot further. Now, from here, I'm going to continue, basically, I'm going to release a few more videos that show perhaps an intermediate or a stacker setup, and where you could take the build from here, and then finally a finished character. I'm planning on liquidating some of the stuff I currently have sitting in my stash. So I have a mirror, I have a power charge ring lying around. I'm gonna just liquidate them and juice up the ore stacker for the sake of making the videos, and then at the end of it, I'm going to make a complete guide that's going to cover everything in the videos and more. The guide is going to have the level of effort you have probably come to expect from me, pretty much in the same vein as my Stormrend guide, where you're going to have trade site links on everything, you're going to have very detailed explanations, etc. Part of why I have gone through this little exercise is because I found at the moment there is a complete drought on Aura Stacker information out there, and what we do have perhaps sometimes isn't so concise or isn't the best at explaining our options. Now, the content creator I can recommend is Kobe Black Mamba. He does have some very good resources available on Aura Stacker, and for a few leagues now he has been league starting it. Someone I would definitely recommend checking out. You can even go to his stream and ask him questions if you want. I never managed to catch him and pick his brain, but I picked the brain of some of the other Aura Stackers, but he league starts it, and he's very up to date with Aura stacking information. He's even got a build diary series on his YouTube, which you can, if this guide is not sufficient for you, you can go check that out as well. But yeah, for the most part, I just felt that there wasn't enough resources available for this stuff, and I felt that this playstyle would probably benefit from the level of detail I like to bring to my content. So I hope this was very helpful for you guys. You can catch me playing it on stream. I picked up my streaming schedule. I'm now consistently streaming every day at pretty much the same times. I'll probably update an official schedule at some point, but things have been going good there. I recommend you checking me out if you haven't already. I provide round-the-clock assistance if you have any questions relating to Stormbrand and now Aura Stack Ice. You can just drop by the stream anytime and ask for help, and for the most part, I'll be happy to go through your POBs with you on stream for the benefit of everyone else as well. But yeah, thanks a lot. Hope this was helpful, and I will catch you guys soon.